Hello everyone! Our first look into Natlan is finally here, and Kachina is one of the 3 new Natlan characters coming in patch 5.0. Although she is the simplest character out of the bunch as a 4-star, she is the only character releasing in 5.0 that is an off-fielder. Combined with one of the new Natlan artifact sets, she's looking like a pretty valuable support and potentially one of the best 4-stars in the game. So let's get right into explaining her initial kit. As always, remember that this is very early information, so very subject to change. Before we talk about the kit, we must first talk about Nightsoul. Nightsoul is the special mechanic for all character kits of Natlan. All of their kits play around the Nightsoul mechanic, whether in or out of combat. Nightsoul also is required for the new Natlan artifact sets you will be using. So what does Nightsoul do? Nightsoul has 3 main features. First is Nightsoul Burst. All this does is that when you have Natlan characters on your team, whenever a Natlan character does elemental damage, this effect will trigger. The more Natlan characters you have on your team, the shorter the trigger interval. The cooldown is shared party-wide, and currently with 1 Natlan character, the cooldown is 18 seconds, with 2, the cooldown is 12 seconds, and with 3 or more, the cooldown is 9 seconds. Next is Nightsoul Blessing. This is the main effect of Nightsoul for Natlan characters, where the characters enter a special enhanced state to deal the majority of their damage. While in this enhanced state, the Natlan characters gain a special Nightsoul gauge where they can accumulate and spend Nightsoul points for extra damage, or just extend the duration of their enhanced state depending on the character. What Nightsoul Blessing does is unique for each Natlan character, so you'll have to look into their specific kits to know how it affects the character. The last aspect of Nightsoul is Nightsoul Transmission. This is an exploration feature. The Nightsoul enhanced states for each Natlan character can be used in the overworld for faster traveling. Nightsoul Transmission basically allows you to stay in the state longer and can unlock special exploration movement abilities while exploring the specific areas of Natlan. With the Nightsoul mechanic explained, let's talk about Kachina. Kachina is a 4-star Geo polearm user that ascends with Geo damage. The base stats are shown here. Her main sources of damage entirely scale off of defense and can be done off-field or on-field, but the off-field playstyle will be the most effective way to utilize her kit. And just like the other releasing Natlan characters, she also has potent overworld exploration capabilities. First, let's start off with her normal talent. Her attack animations with the polearm are quite unique, but like the other Natlan characters, you won't be using these, so you can safely ignore her normal talent. Next, Kachina's elemental skill, which is the core of her kit. Pressing her skill places her drill car, called Turbo Twirly, on the field. Holding the skill instead will immediately allow Kachina to ride the drill car around. Either way, Kachina enters Nightsoul's Blessing and gains 60 Nightsoul points. You can switch between riding Turbo Twirly and placing it on the field by pressing her skill again. Riding Turbo Twirly is Kachina's method of fast overworld movement, and she can even use it to climb walls. This will continually consume Nightsoul points, and you'll have to stop driving once you reach 0. In addition, while riding Turbo Twirly, you can press normal attack on Kachina to perform a ground pound, damaging enemies around you, which consumes some Nightsoul points. This is Kachina's way of doing damage on field. However, her most effective playstyle is just placing Turbo Twirly on the field and swapping out. When the drill exists independently on the field, it will periodically create shockwaves around it, dealing damage to enemies nearby and consuming some Nightsoul points. At C0, Turbo Twirly can attack a total of 6 times, whether Kachina rides it herself or just places it on the field. Lastly, Turbo Twirly is considered a Geo construct. Kachina's skill can be amplified with her Elemental Burst, 18-second cooldown, 70 energy cost. Her burst does a nuke of AoE damage and creates a turbo drill field that lasts 12 seconds. While Turbo Twirly is in this field, the AoE of its attacks are larger, and when Kachina is riding it, her movement speed is increased. Since the 18-second cooldown of the burst is similar to the 20-second cooldown of her skill, you will want to burst every rotation to ensure an amplified Turbo Twirly every rotation. Kachina's passive talents help increase her personal damage. With her A1, whenever Nightsoul Burst is triggered, Kachina will gain 20% geo damage for 10 seconds. Remember that Nightsoul Burst is triggered when a Natlan character in the party deals elemental damage. With the current information of the trigger interval of Nightsoul Burst, Kachina will not gain the buff 100% of the time, but a little bit of uptime is nice nonetheless. Kachina's A4 damage increases the damage of Turbo Twirly by 20% of Kachina's defense. Kachina's damage was already defense scaling, so this is just some nice extra damage. Lastly, the special passive talent. It seems like the special passive talent for all Natlan characters is purely exploration based. There are a lot of unfamiliar terms which we will probably learn as we explore in 5.0, but the gist of it is that while exploring in Natlan, you can enter Nightsoul Blessing more for exploration by triggering Nightsoul Transmission, and you can unlock some special movement abilities while interacting with special mechanisms in Natlan. With Kachina specifically, she also consumes 90% less stamina when riding Turbo Twirly in Natlan. A 4-star character's Constellations can be very kit defining, so let's go over them. C1 allows Kachina to absorb nearby crystallized shards whenever she mounts or dismounts Turbo Twirly, similar similar to how Navia can when she holds her skill. In addition, whenever any party member picks up a shard, Kachina will get 3 energy, and this has a cooldown of 5 seconds. Very nice for her energy requirements. With Kachina C2, using her burst will immediately give Kachina Nightsoul's Blessing and spawn Turbo Twirly if it's not on the field. However, if it already is on the field, Kachina will regain 16 Nightsoul points, which translates to 2 extra hits from Turbo Twirly. These 2 extra hits are way more important than the ability to spawn the drill without the skill, so you will still always press skill into burst when utilizing Kachina. C3 increases Kachina's skill talent level by 3, C4 gives the active character extra defense depending on how many enemies are within the field created by Kachina's burst, C5 increases the burst talent level by 3, and lastly C6 allows Kachina to deal extra damage whenever a shield is replaced or destroyed with a cooldown of 5 seconds. This is clearly designed around picking up crystallized shields, and this will happen as Kachina's off-field damage will proc crystallize, so C6 is just some nice extra damage. Overall, Kachina is not a 4-star that is heavily dependent on Constellations, which is great. Sure, her C6 is some nice extra damage, but Kachina's personal damage isn't too important in teams. Her best constellation is definitely her C2 for the 2 extra hits of her skill, thus increasing the duration of her off-field presence. Ideally, you should prioritize this constellation, but even at C0, Kachina will still be able to fulfill her role in teams. And that is Kachina's kit in a nutshell. Talent priority is simple, skill over burst. Her gameplay rotation is very simple as a support in a team. You skill, then burst, then switch out to your other characters. Quick, easy, and requires little field time. Now let's cover Kachina's potential builds. For 5-star weapons, because Kachina doesn't scale off of attack, you could use some polearms like Homa and Jade Spear just for the crit, but honestly, I don't like any of the 5-star polearms, and her 4-star weapon options just look straight up better. Deathmatch gives a ton of crit rate, which is great, so it will be a fine weapon if you want to optimize her personal damage. The new Natlan craftable polearm is also a great damage option. It's pretty much just made for Kachina since she just gives a ton of defense, a great free-to-play option. And lastly, Favonius Lance is, as always, a great support weapon with the extra particle generation, and the ER substat is good because Kachina does want to burst every rotation. Because of its supportive capabilities, this is arguably her best weapon option. Next, let's go over her artifact options. Kachina's personal damage is decent but not too impressive. If she just did damage, she wouldn't be a very impressive character. However, because she is a Natlan off-field sub-DPS, she can access the new Natlan support artifact set, Scroll of the Embered City's Hero. The 2-piece will give her extra energy, which is great, but the 4-piece is the sole reason this artifact is so good. When the character wearing this artifact set triggers an elemental reaction, characters associated with the elements of that reaction gets damage percent. For instance, if a Hydro Crystallize is triggered by Kachina with this set, both Hydro and Geo units will get the buff. If the character triggers this during Nightsoul's Blessing, aka a Natlan character, the total damage buff increases to 45 damage percent, which is pretty insane. Because of this massive buff, this is realistically Kachina's only artifact option. For artifact stats, she is a pure defense scaler, so defense hourglass or energy recharge if you're struggling with her ER requirements, geo damage or defense goblet, and crit circlet. Stats prioritize crit, enough ER, and defense percent. For ER requirements, I would recommend around 140%, potentially a bit more just to be safe, and especially if you're playing her solo Geo. Lastly, let's run through Kachina's potential teams. Because her skill is considered a Geo construct, she synergizes very well with Chiori to activate her second doll. This duo is a pretty good double Geo core that is pretty versatile. Ideally, you pair this with another 2 characters of the same element such as double Pyro or double Hydro, and in this way, everyone benefits from the 45 damage percent buff from the new Natlan artifact set. Kachina can even do this without Chiori. She can serve as the single Geo character in an otherwise mono element comp. She brings a little bit of personal damage, but most importantly, provides the entire team with that damage percent buff. Kachina in this role can be replaced with future Natlan characters, but as a Geo character, she will remain one of the premier buffers for Geo teams, especially Navia. A standard Navia team is Navia, Chiori, Shangling, and Bennett, which is already solid. However, the team does lack damage buffs, especially team-wide ones. With Kachina and the Natlan support set, she can replace Chiori and provide that invaluable 45% damage bonus to the entire team, making the team even better. She also doesn't have to replace Chiori. You can put all 3 Geo units together for a solid team, as long as the 4th unit provides off-field elemental application like Yelan. And again, the entire team will get that damage buff. For the other Geo carries like Ito and Noelle, Kachina works similarly. However, her performance is worse because these teams already had a team buffer in Goro who will generally perform better than Kachina, especially at C6. And that's everything I wanted to cover on Kachina. Typically, strong 4-star characters, especially the ones that were recently released, are main DPSs like Gaming, supports like Chevreuse, or ones that provide defensive utility like Yao Yao. Good 4-star characters are rarely off-field DPSs. The most recently released one was Rosaria in patch 1.4, but finally in patch 5.0, another good 4-star sub-DPS will be releasing with Kachina. Currently, her damage at C6 is similar to Albedo's damage. The damage is definitely not the best, but for a new 4-star releasing, it's also not that bad if you consider that context. However, with the new support set, Kachina also brings 45 damage percent to a team, which is a huge buff similar to the damage percent provided by both Farina or Kazuha. This makes Kachina both a sub-DPS and a buffer, a role that is typically reserved for 5-star characters. Like Navia and Shiori before her, Kachina is another Geo unit that elevates the Geo niche, but she can also provide that damage buff to other elemental teams, making her a more versatile support. Now granted, the new artifact set plays a huge part in carrying Kachina's strength as a character. Her main value is just from proccing the 4-piece effect. However, utilizing strong artifact sets plays a big role in a character's kit and meta strength. Anemo characters and Viridescent Venera are a premier example of this. Realistically, Kachina acting like this sort of universal buffer will have less value as more Natlan characters are released that can also utilize the new artifact set. However, Kachina will still be an option regardless and will remain a top tier buffer for Geo teams, especially Navia. Overall, I'm glad that Kachina as a Geo 4-star unit is looking to have a lot of value in team building. Hopefully HOYOverse doesn't change the artifact set too much. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Kachina's kit was helpful to you all. Leave any questions in the comments and I'll try to clarify anything, and drop the video a like or sub to the channel if you like this type of content. I also recently made a new Discord server, so if you want to ask me any more specific questions, feel free to join and chill. And with that, I hope you all are excited about what Natlan has to offer.